Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Public History with Jake and Justin. I am Jake Wynn, and I'm here with my co host, Justin Voigthofer. Justin, how are you doing today?
Doing good, Jake. Spent the entire weekend watching the Masters, so I've been a couch potato, which has been just a fantastic weekend to me. So couldn't ask for a better weekend, even though I didn't go outside.
I love it. I love it. A good sports weekend with something going on the whole weekend is just it's just marvelous.
It's the perfect.
So I'm glad to hear that. I spent my weekend outside doing a lot of gardening, getting our house all in order for the summer with some planting and some new flowers, and we planted a tree, and it was a lot of fun and a good kind of relaxing way to spend a weekend. So I'm very thankful for that opportunity as well. Um, so thank you all for listening in. We are very excited for a first in a new series of podcasts that we're going to bring to you on Public History with Jake and Justin. We're calling this series that we are developing "Making a Public Historian," and these are going to be conversations with our fellow practitioners of public history. They're going to be individuals who work in the field today, and they're going to share some insights from their careers working at historic sites, national parks, museums, and all of the other amazing places where history is practiced out there with the public. And our first interview subject, our first conversation is with our very good friend, Maureen Lavelle, who is a former National Park Service ranger and currently the history programs manager for the city of Boise, Department of Arts and History in Idaho. Maureen is a proud graduate of the West Virginia University Public History Graduate Program and is a museum enthusiast. Maureen, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really am excited for this series. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are thrilled to have you. And a little bit of background on all three of us, Justin, Maureen, and I all have spent some time together working at Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park in Virginia. So we have a background together. We're all pretty close friends, and we're excited to have this conversation. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more as the conversation goes, but Maureen, if you could tell us a little bit about your current role there in Boise, Idaho.
Thank you. Yeah. So like you mentioned, history programs manager for the city Department of Arts and History. And I think what's unusual about this department, it's not like any other department you really find throughout the country. We focus on not only interpreting and preserving, the history of the city, like the administrative records, but also the history stories of the municipality, of the community itself. The art side of things is like public art, and sometimes that is informed. A lot of times that's informed by history projects. So public art pieces that the city will commission will incorporate like symbols or some kind of element that's informed by historic research. A lot of what I do is I'll do research requests for um, developers who maybe are looking to um, install a new building or new house, and they want to know the history of that landscape or the property owners, or something, so that they can either maybe that research will help inform what they might name the site, or like any kind of interpretive markers they want to put in, or something of that nature. This summer we are kind of relaunching guided walking tours of the city. Things had kind of damped down after COVID, during and after COVID, and now we're trying to revitalize that. I also manage the oral history collection and the history, or the city's like 3D collection, the artifact collection. Um, it's honestly, it's wearing a lot of hats, and I think that's going to be very familiar to a lot of public historians out there. There's no ideally, you'd have a lot of different people operating a lot of different roles in this department, but we're a pretty small team, so we all have to do a lot of different tasks to manage the history program itself.
That's really cool. And then I guess the question I have, Mo, I have
Mhm.
one growing up. I want to say to the audience too, Mo is a fellow West Virginia University grad. So we are two-thirds Mountaineers on this show, and I'm pretty proud that Mo went to a WVU. included that in her bio. But two is, I mean, you grew up in Idaho. It sounds like it's steeped in local history out there. Like what got you interested in history in the area, and then what type of history is it? I assume it's a lot of westward expansion, but what type of stuff are you dealing with the city?
Sure. So with the city, yes, you're right, westward expansion, but we're also really trying to highlight the many diverse immigrant groups that came and actually shaped not only Boise, but the territory and later state of Idaho. I think one of the more fascinating fun facts that I've learned in this role is that in 1863, when the city was founded and during the gold rushes that really helped shape this area, by the 1870 census, nearly 30% of Idaho's population was Chinese.
Oh, wow.
Like huge, huge numbers of people from all over the world poured into the territory, set up businesses here, became gold miners, and that kind of thing. So we're really trying to emphasize to folks that you know, it wasn't a traditional westward expansion and displacement of indigenous people. We're talking about a global movement of people to Idaho and trying to emphasize how each cultural identity or cultural group shaped this place. And but what's funny is I grew up in Idaho. I didn't learn this local history for a very, very long time. I'm sorry to say, like Idaho history was studied in fourth grade, and I don't know about you, but I don't remember anything from fourth grade. Um, my interest in history really started was really cultivated by my family and family road trips actually out east. I think the formative moment that I knew I was hooked on history was when my dad took me on a road trip, summer after sixth grade, and we went to Chancellorsville and Antietam and all those Civil War hits, and that's what got me hooked. It took a long time to really understand local history, to understand Idaho history, and that's a big motivating inspiration in my current job is to try and get people interested in their local history now in a way that I wasn't when I was younger.
Yeah, that surprises me with fourth grade. West Virginia history is eighth grade, and I still think that's a little early. But yeah, fourth grade doing local history, I feel like is super,
It's way early.
super early. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
never touched it again.
Huh.
Not in the public school system here.
What? And I guess so. My next question would be: Have you always eh, is it always been public history, or did you ever think about doing academia? Because I think sometimes
Mm,
when people grow up, they think about academia and history, and history professors sitting in college and do that. And I think sometimes people ignore public history as a real profession, a real kind of field to get into.
yeah.
So was it always, were you always interested in public history, or were you just kind of as you went on said, "I know, I kind of want to do this."
I think so, but I don't think I had a sense of what that was or like a word for it until I started going to grad school. I think I always knew when I entered college that I wanted to study history. I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. I distinctly remember my senior year of college. There was a kind of like a professional development discussion with professors. And at one point, one of them said, "Hey guys, Conan O'Brien was a history major, so you guys can do anything with this." And I was so thrown off by that. I was like, "What? That's insane." But what drew me to public history was my first internship with the National Park Service at Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park. It was it was the very first time I was able to talk to any kind of audience, regular visitors about the things I was interested in and like see their reaction and have these conversations with, and then not only that, but living and working with all of you guys, with fellow interns and seasonals and like being around people my own age who are also interested in the same things I was interested in. I mean, I don't want to like totally poo-poo academia, but it just doesn't seem like there's a similar experience in an academic setting. To live and work on the battlefield, to go in and talk with visitors about, yeah, about the things I was so excited to learn. I mean, that was a formative experience. During grad school, Justin, I wonder if you remember this too. It was one of our seminars. One of our professors sat us down one day and was like, "Okay, here's what academia looks like. It's research, producing articles, producing books, like chasing down that tenure position." And that sounded really intimidating to me. It's it's like trying to chase down the next idea or like find the next like niche of research. And I just do better in kind of a group setting, so to speak. Like the public informs what I'm interested in, and then I take what I'm interested in and inform the public. It's a cycle, and it's a fun conversation. And so I think I don't remember ever seriously entertaining academia.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's yeah. I think that's something that I agree with you that I did not hear. I always wanted to be a history major. I loved what I wanted to do, and then it's funny. I was a history major. I got my MA in history, and
Hmm.
I hate writing. I
Yeah,
despise writing, and it was just
right.
like, oh, cool. Here I can do history and not have to worry about like you just said. Article after article, book after book. It's more
Hmm.
fun to be out, talk with the public, meet people face to face. So I agree with you 100%. And I
Yeah,
think sometimes that's just lost when people hear history degree. I think a lot of times it's, oh, this is what I got growing up, and I'm sure other people get it too. Was, oh, you want to be a historian, or oh, you want to be a professor, or oh, hey, you want to be a lawyer, because they were like, oh, history, you're going
yeah,
to go to law school. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, I think it's just really
right.
fun to remind people that hey, there's more to history than just academia and public history
Hmm.
is a real field that I think is growing, or at least I've seen grow pretty dramatically since I went to grad school, and the different opportunities in different schools that are putting emphasis in kind of a program like that. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
I
no,
think honestly too, I doubled down in just working within the history field altogether. I'm sure, I wonder if you two got the same questions or like comments like history degree. What are you going to do with that? I remember my mom one time, she's like, "You have a tattoo and a history degree, you'll never get a job." And so, but like, it's like you said, it's grown. The field has grown so much, and there's so many cool opportunities. And what I think is awesome about public history is how you can incorporate it into any kind of job. Um, if if you ever end up, talking with our mutual friend Becky, who works with the patent and trademark office, she brings her history expertise into their work and helps engage the public into something that they might not realize is ever of interest to them.
Yeah, and I want to go back just for a little bit here. I think for this next section
Hmm.
to kind of go back to our a little bit about the National Park Service and kind of your inroad into working there through
Hmm.
Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park. You said something that really struck me, which is just like kind of the a little bit of an epiphany moment of like going to Fredericksburg and starting, an internship there and then working as a seasonal. I had a similar experience there in the summer of 2015 where it was like, I had always thought about working in public history and then went there, and between all the interns and the seasonals, including the two of you, I realized I was like, I'm amongst my people.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, one of the most transformational summers of my life, and something that I'm so glad that kind of on a whim I ended up doing. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about your work at Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park and your kind of career as it evolved with the National Park Service, because it sent you to some really cool and interesting places over the years.
Yeah. I mean, those were the best summers of my life. That is not an exaggeration to say. Like, it was unbelievable to be surrounded by like-minded people, young like-minded people. And I mean, you remember, like, we go to work, we run the visitor center, we talk to, people coming in through the door, and like that's a good time. But then at night, it's, we all gather together for dinner and chat and go on little field trips or excursions on our weekday or our weekends off. And like it's an immersive, fun, creative experience. And it didn't feel like we were all competing with each other, like we were feeding each other's enthusiasm. And I can't emphasize enough, like how, like you said, how transformative those experiences were. Um, the the Park Service, I adore it. It's also, it has its challenges. And I was a seasonal. I did 2 summer internships at Fredericksburg, and then I think 4 seasonal jobs at Fredericksburg. And all I think in I call it the normal world. In reality, I think a lot of people are used to like internship, entry level job, and like they kind of walk up the ladder from there. I imagine all of us at some point were thinking like, okay, this is our gateway to a permanent job at Fredericksburg, or something related. But it becomes a grind. Like it's it's competitive because there aren't that many job opportunities available. It's competitive because there are so many qualified candidates for those small numbers of jobs. And so after a while, it became clear that the only way to kind of advance or to keep moving in the history field was to leave Fredericksburg, which was so hard. Like it was such a foreign and strange experience to work at another park after Fredericksburg. But it was, it's one of my best pieces of advice to give anybody. You might be committed to a certain geographic region. You might be committed to a certain history, story, whatever that might be. But to really progress in this field, it really helps to get a variety of experiences, and that could be, again, a variety of history backgrounds, a variety of work experiences, a variety of geographic experiences. Like moving around the country has helped me enormously.
Well, Mo,
Um,
can
yeah.
you let people, like, I don't think people understand how when she says she's moved across the country, it is literally across the country. Mo, do you want to like map out your journey for us at the different
Oh
places that
gosh.
you work?
Well, okay. I will say I have moved one way, from, I'm going to call it not coast to coast, but time zone to time zone, from mountain to East Coast. I've moved across the country 20 times. After Fredericksburg, after 6 seasons there total, I moved to South Dakota and worked at Minuteman Missile National Historic Site, Gateway National Recreation Area in New York City, Death Valley National Park in California, and then most recently Camp Nelson National Monument in Kentucky. And I found a lot to love in every one of those places. And in some of those places, I was ready to commit, like, I want to stay here forever. But in order to, maybe get a promotion, make a little bit more money, or get a promotion and get some more responsibilities, it became necessary to move around. Um, and I have no regrets about moving, but it can be it can be exhausting too. It can be tough, and I realize not available to everybody. Um, so that's one thing I always like to say is, like, take advantage of those opportunities if you can, even if it's like moving a couple hours down the road or something. Because if you can get that variety, you can do a lot of different. You can take on a lot of different tasks and responsibilities that diversify your resume and make you a really invaluable candidate to that history job that might be your dream.
Well, I guess going back to your first, when you asked, like, when you said day to day, you wear a bunch of different hats, it would seem
Hmm.
like doing that prepared you for this job in that way because you've had to wear all of those different hats at all the different national parks and all the different. And I guess that's the thing about parks too, is that parks are run very differently. You think it's one umbrella National Park Service, like everything's the same. I mean,
Hmm.
yes, the structure's there, but from what I've seen, and maybe Mo, you could speak to it too, is like every park has its unique flavor on how they do things and how they talk about things. And I think that's the beauty of the National Park Service system, is that it is just such a broad scope about what you can talk about on a day-to-day basis wearing that uniform.
Absolutely. Through my Park Service career, I had the opportunity to, like, dabble in oral history, to dabble in social media development, to dabble in exhibit design. And what's tricky about constantly dabbling is, like, sometimes it's hard to get the expertise skill set that you need to make it a really quality product. So you either have to really commit yourself to drilling down and teaching yourself, a lot in a short amount of time, or, just kind of use that as like a sampler and decide, like, okay, this is what I want to specialize in and get really good at, and this is not for me. And try to find those opportunities where you can continue to hone a skill set that suits you. But I think one of my more I think one of my most influential Park Service experiences was working at Death Valley National Park. And to give you a little bit of background on that, before Death Valley was the place where I got my permanent status in the Park Service, which, if you're in the Park Service, like, that's the golden ticket, right? Being a seasonal is a lot of fun, but you don't get benefits, you don't get stability. Everybody's chasing that permanent opportunity. Before I got my job at Death Valley, though, I was applying to everything I could get my hands on, and a GS a permanent job opened at Fredericksburg. And I was like, that's my dream job. That's where I started. That's where I want to be. I want to live there for 30 years. And that's where I want my career to be. but I didn't get it. And I was devastated. I was so heartbroken because I was like, what am I going to do now? The next opportunity that came up was Death Valley National Park, which is in Southern California. And I thought, this is it. Like, I can't, I trained as a Civil War, 19th century historian. What am I going to do? What am I going to talk about at Death Valley? But I had to take it because it was the only permanent offering I had. And guys, it was the most fun job I've ever had. I because one, nobody else was a historian in Death Valley, so all the cool history projects, big and small, came my way, and I got to do more in my career there than I had, for years up to that point. Um, I was a big fish in a small pond, so to speak, when it came to, history research, exhibit design, et cetera. Um, so that's another benefit of moving around and bouncing around if you can, because you might bring an expert set of skills to an institution, that is missing them completely. And so I am transformed. I will never say to anybody, you know, just because you might be a Civil War scholar, don't decline that job at Yellowstone or Yosemite, because everybody who's applying for those jobs are probably ecologists and biologists and what have you. But if you get that job, like, you will get more interesting work than you know what to do with. And I like run with that opportunity. It's so fun.
Yeah, seeing all of the experiences and hearing about those experiences in Death Valley, I was always a little bit jealous, but also a little terrified, to be honest,
Oh,
of all of the. I mean, it's called Death Valley for a reason, right? Like, it's
yes.
like the environment's trying to kill you, the
Yeah.
animals are trying to kill you.
Well, if I recall correctly, Mo, weren't you there like during the hottest day on record or something like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's funny, when I very first moved into my housing in Death Valley, I found a huge scorpion in the kitchen. I was like, oh my God. And then, yes, Death Valley is the hottest place on earth. And we call it a 130-degree day. I'm sure many meteorologists will debate that, but yes, I've seen more 125 plus degree days in my lifetime than I care to admit. Um, yes, it does try to kill
That's
you. The
wild.
grocery store, the
Oh my
grocery store is
gosh.
an hour away. I could go on about it for forever. You can't get a cold shower in the summer because the water is just too hot. Like, it's amazing how insane the environment is out there, for sure. But I had so much fun. Like, the projects I got to do, I applied for, um, I think the total was $45,000 worth of grants, and we used those grants to start an oral history project for women connected to the park. We created an exhibit about the most successful female miner in Death Valley, and recorded some oral histories with some of the indigenous women of the Timbisha Shoshone tribe. Like, did a lot of incredible work that, frankly, I wouldn't have had the chance to do at a more history centric park. Like, I might have had the opportunity, but it certainly have been more competitive.
Right.
Yeah, and that gets to kind of what, where I would love to take the conversation next, which is
Yeah.
kind of get a little more in the weeds about, your perspectives on public history and practicing public history,
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
and hearing about some of the projects that you worked on there. I think that's a good transition point. And I was just curious about, if there's any kind of historical insight or story from your work from the various places you've been, that's profoundly impacted you in the course of your career.
Oh, um, I think my favorite programs or exhibits or work is anything that can connect, you know, the past to the present in a way that helps explain to people, you know, why a certain problem has evolved into the present day to be what it is, or, explain why, I don't know, like, I guess I just like to create a through line of some sort and create a kind of practicality to our history. So, for example, here in Boise, um, one facet of history that we like to talk about and underscore in a lot of our projects is the history of urban renewal in the town. and how development projects affected certain neighborhoods. Boise had not one but two different Chinatowns in its history, and both have been, not completely, but the vast majority have been lost. The vast majority of the historic landscape has been lost due to that urban renewal. And to share that history of not only urban renewal but also the cultural groups, for example, the Chinese cultural community or African American or Basque in Boise, to share the history of those groups helps confound notions of Boise or Idaho as pretty homogenous community. It is, I'm not saying that we live in the most diverse place on earth, but what's important to remember is that a lot of people had a hand in shaping this community, and unfortunately a lot of people's like their physical presence in this community was lost, abolished, obliterated. And I find it really important to to confound people's notions of what this space can be. Another thing in Boise, it's if you live here, if you're quote unquote native here, um, people gripe about how fast the community is growing and how many people are moving into this space. And okay, that's fine. Like, I get it, traffic increases or housing prices go up and all those things. However, the history of Boise has always been of explosive growth. And this is not a new sentiment or feeling. But it's, everybody, literally, you know, everybody came from somewhere else and shaped this community and made it grow so quickly. And so to show people like that's not a new feeling, that's important, but also to ask them, okay, well, what do you think happened to the people who originally called the Boise Valley home? Where are they, and what has happened to them, and like what is their perspective on growth and development? Um, I didn't really answer your question in terms of like what project we've put together. Like, we're trying to write articles for our website, and I did we recently installed an exhibit about the Chinatowns here in City Hall. But it's like all of that sentiment is really going to inform a lot of our projects, our walking tours and different public offerings. But yeah, I really hope to create some kind of through line and not make these like quaint, did you know kind of histories that people you know interact with on their weekends or their leisure time. Like, I want this to be a provocative um, educational experience that people can use to inform decisions that they make, whether that's you know maybe like what they think of continued growth in Boise, or what they think of like a certain advocacy issue in the community, or whatever it might be. I need it to create some kind of practical effect for the public.
Yeah, and that's actually pretty awesome. That's a great way to look at it too. It's like I feel like sometimes, yeah, we're resigned to thinking all history is just fun facts and dates and names and stuff, but there's a tangible way that you can I don't know, influence your community and influence your city by addressing these issues and bringing up the past. And like you said, Mo, like letting people know, hey, this isn't the first time this has happened. This has
Hmm.
happened before. These types of growth and explosive growth has happened before,
Yeah.
and the different ways that they dealt with it too. My next question is going to be, Mo, we talked already about how we worked together at Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania. Me and
Yes.
you go back to 2014, which is crazy because that's a decade ago. If you want to
Oh
feel
my
it. I
gosh.
know that's crazy to me. But how have you seen kind of a shift in public humanity or public history here in the United States since we started working together a decade ago?
Oh my gosh.
What has been pivotal? What has been kind of the change that you have seen as a public historian that that person who showed up to the Gregory Mertz seasonal training at
Oh.
Fredericksburg at Spotsylvania National Military Park in 2014 could not have envisioned, or if you could go back and tell that person, hey, this is what's going to happen in the next 10 years. What would
Mhm.
you say, or what would you say to that kind of that question?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift I've witnessed is and experienced is I think the way we were trained with the Park Service was very much the sage on a stage kind of delivery. And I think, specifically to our experience in the Civil War community, our tours were not as open to the audience for input as a way of like kind of protecting ourselves, because we worked in Virginia during, 2014, 2015, 2016, when like volatility, Confederate flag rallies, Black Lives Matter protests, all of these, mainstream contentious debates and things like that were really at the forefront. So for what I mean is, like, I wasn't going to give a tour that offered my audience a lot of opportunities to talk back to me or like discuss issues in my program, because I didn't want to give the microphone to somebody who wasn't going to give it back or be respectful. Over time, though, and I think one of the trickier things about transitioning from the Park Service to a non-Park Service public history role is working with communities to build, to build programming and exhibits based on their needs, their wants, and that kind of thing. Like, not always approaching something as, I'm the expert and here you are, public, here is the product, you're welcome. But actually soliciting, uh, feedback or initiating a conversation before a tour or an exhibit or anything like that is developed in the first place, asking people what they are looking for, and then trying to reflect those conversations in whatever the end product is. And yeah, that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot more time. It takes a lot of patience, because typically, public historians are working with people who are not full-time public historians. They have day jobs. They have, other things to occupy their time. So it can slow things down, or, just create complications. But I think that's been the important transition, is moving from that kind of academic, like, even though it's public history, it seems like, here, I'm an expert and I'm going to deliver to you, and instead asking the community, what do you want, and then trying to respond to that.
Yeah, I think that those are some really great perspectives. And I think that, describing that kind of evolution in public history that you've experienced kind of mirrors what I would say is my experience. And I know experience of a lot
Hmm.
of other public historians just in the time frame of that last decade. And I think we'll see in future episodes, Justin and I have talked about this a lot. I think we really want to, with this podcast, look specifically at those years that you mentioned, 2014, 2015, 2016, as being a really pivotal, especially in the field of public history around Civil War history sites, as being a
Hmm.
really pivotal moment when really there's this kind of paradigm shift that happens with public history, with the public in general, and its understanding of the American Civil War. And a lot of that has to do with perceptions and discussions that are happening and events that are happening in the country around the Civil War that really changed the discussion and the tenor of the discussion in this country around Civil War history, that I think is really, really important to understand, and to add kind of these public historian voices like your own to that discussion about that evolution in Civil War history and Civil War memory. So listeners out there, more to come on these conversations, and probably we'll be including Maureen in those conversations as well. But as we head towards our conclusion here, I do have
Hmm.
one last question for you, Mo, and that is, uh, we're gearing these episodes towards kind of emerging public historians, maybe some of those that are in school, maybe interested in pursuing a career as a public historian. And I want to see if you have any advice from your experiences and background for aspiring public historians who might be listening out there.
Yeah, thank you. And we've already touched on one, and it bears repeating. Like, and I realize this is very privileged advice to give, but if you have the means in time, in finances, whatever it might be, if you're able to move around and chase an opportunity in another state or even across the country, I hope you do. I hope you can, because it creates diversity in your skill set, in your knowledge. It provokes a lot of curiosity, within yourself. Like, you don't always have to chase the opportunities that speak to the specific history that you are most interested in. Um, and I'd be glad to offer myself as a resource to help people find those things. Like the Park Service has a lot of great internships that will provide housing and stipends to interns. The Great Basin Institute out here in the West, another opportunity to get paid, short-term work, with housing and that sort of thing. SCA, the Student Conservation Association, all these AmeriCorps, there are ways to get funding to support you to bounce around the country, and I hope people will take that chance. But one universal piece of advice I have for anybody, this doesn't hinge on, what resources you have, but it's public history in general, whatever you want to call it, it's a competitive field. There will never be enough funding ever, given to institutions, schools, museums, anything to support all of us in doing all the work we need at a livable wage. And I strongly encourage young or aspiring public history professionals to prioritize your mental health and to try not to fall in the trap of comparing your journey to somebody else's. We are all chasing a limited number of opportunities, and it's hard. I mean, sometimes like you can be one of many qualified candidates, and sometimes the job will go to somebody because because the interviewer knows them or something like that. Like there's so many circumstances that go into why one person gets a job and why a person doesn't. But what's toxic, what's hard to handle is if you're constantly looking over at your peers and saying, well, I'm not at that level, so I must be failing, or it is a tough field for mental health. So figuring out a way to forgive yourself, or for not forgive yourself, but like not avoiding putting pressure on yourself to be the best, to achieve the most, to do X, Y, and Z. And then also, celebrating and supporting your colleagues when they get their successes, because they're going to turn around and do the same thing for you. But you can't constantly compare yourselves to each other, because it's going to be different. There's also no recipe. There's no specific thing to do that's going to guarantee you success or guarantee you this job by this age or this level or anything like that. Like it's going to unfold differently for everybody. So be kind to yourself and be kind to your colleagues. That ultimately is going to be more helpful to you in the long run.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Maureen, for taking the time today. We have one last segment, and we'd love for you to join in with us, Maureen, for this. Our closing segment we call Postscript. This is a segment of the show where we share something from the last week that's left an impression on us that we want to share with you out there listening. It could be a book, an article, a movie, or an experience. It's something that we want to remember from our last week. And Justin, I'm going to start with you. What is your postscript this week?
Well, we mentioned at the beginning, I've been glued to the couch the entire week watching the Masters and the golf tournament there. And I think my favorite thing to point out with the Masters that I try to do with folks is that the history of there is pretty cool. I mean, it's one of the few places that there's been a golf tournament played there every single year. So for sporting purposes, you can say, oh, that whole, you remember when Tiger Woods did that back in this year, or, when so-and-so did that. It's literally on the exact same spot every single year, which is cool because it just keeps adding history to it. But my favorite story with the Masters that I'll share now is I'm a huge Dwight D. Eisenhower fan, one of my favorite people throughout history. He was a member at Augusta National, and funny enough, he was a golfer. If you know one thing about Eisenhower, if you ever visit the Eisenhower National Historic Site up in Gettysburg, he built his own kind of putting green. That way he could golf and he could, maintain his sports as he was up in Gettysburg. But it was his identity with golf was so big that during the let me make sure I have a good one. During the 1956 presidential race, he actually created a bumper sticker called "Ben Hogan for President. If we're going to have a golfer, let's have a good one." So basically saying, hey, like Eisenhower plays so much golf. If we're going to have somebody be the president, let's make the best golfer in the world at that time the president. And then also another thing that Ike used was the slogan, "Don't ask me what I shot," as in don't worry about the score on the course, because it's funny enough, Eisenhower loved the game so much, but a lot of people say wasn't the best at it. And his connection with Augusta is great because he's a member at Augusta National. He becomes really good friends with one of the best golfers of all time, Arnold Palmer. And during 1956, Eisenhower basically shanked a ball into a tree on the golf course and remarked to Arnold Palmer, saying, "Hey, we should probably tear that tree down. I hate the tree. I hit it every single time I play this course. I hit that tree." Well, they kept the tree up. It had been there from its infancy, from it when it was a small little sapling, all the way up until, unfortunately, the tree got lost in, I think, 2014. It was known as the Eisenhower tree, but that tree was prevalent in every single Masters tournament from when Eisenhower was live all the way up to 2014. Got cut down or lost in an ice storm. But what's cool is they preserve parts of the tree, and now one part of it is at the course in the little kind of historical area, and the other part of it is in Abilene, Kansas, at the Dwight D. Eisenhower National, or I guess not National, Presidential Library. So I don't know. It's just one of my fun things that every time I watch the Masters, I think of Eisenhower. I think of that tree when they get to 17, which is cool because, like I said, that is one of the few places where there's history made every single year there. So that's me. That's Eisenhower. That's the Masters. Mo, how about you? What did you do this week that you kind of will remember, or you want to talk about?
Oh, for sure. Well, before I say mine, can I ask you, Justin, like, do you think people, when they were playing with Eisenhower, like, would they, I don't know, was he the kind of person who's like, don't hold back and don't like humor me just because I'm the president? Or do you think people like tried to,
I would have to imagine that'd be a great question. I don't know. I feel like he'd be the type of person that would just, you could beat him, he wouldn't care, right? Like
Mhm.
I don't see Eisenhower being the type of person that'd be like, no, I have to win every single time.
Well,
I
I'd love
think
to see your article on that, like going to the archives and finding his golf
his golf
scores and
scores.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. See
I
who
love
won.
that. Well, I love this segment. So this week, the thing that left the impression was I went and chased the total solar eclipse, and I flew out from Idaho to Louisville, Kentucky. I met a friend, and then we drove up to the town of Wapakoneta, Ohio, and we picked that because it's the birthplace of Neil Armstrong, and we wanted to watch the eclipse. There's a small air and space museum in that town, and we wanted to watch the eclipse there. And thousands of people like showed up. They were sitting on the lawn of this little museum. And if folks, if you haven't seen a total solar eclipse, if you are able to at any point in your life, oh my gosh, it was like I was crying. Like it was an amazing experience. Have either of you been able to? Did you get to see the last one or see this one this year?
I think I was in DC, so we were at, I don't know. I think we were like 70% totality. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I have not experienced total, but I got about 90%. I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for this one.
Oh, okay. Well,
And
fellas, August 2028 is the eclipse over Egypt, so let's go. But I mean, transformative experience. If you get to, please watch it. But when the eclipse was over, my friend and I, we drove down the road. We finished our time in Wapakoneta, and then we drove down the road to the Bicycle Museum of America, which is in, again, a very rural community, New Bremen, Ohio. And it's full of bicycles, but there was a little case dedicated to Neil Armstrong. And what I loved was one of the artifacts on display was like a piece of paper from a spiral notebook, and it had Neil Armstrong's like drawings of the spacecraft, the Apollo 11, like the lunar module and everything. And evidently, these were drawings that he made for his family when he was visiting them at home, like before the Apollo 11 mission. And I just thought, what a fun, like, universal concept. I love space history, and I know people, adore the lunar missions and stuff, the Apollo missions, but like, what a funny, relatable artifact. Like, how many times have you tried to explain to your family, like, well, this is what I do at work, or like, here's how Bitcoin works, or something like, and you make little diagrams on your, sheet of notebook paper or something like that. I just thought that was such a cool little artifact. Like, how did Neil Armstrong's family process like the science and the technology behind the work he was doing? And if anybody gets a chance to go see the Bicycle Museum of America in New Bremen, Ohio, I highly recommend it.
So now my question, Yumo, is like,
Hmm.
you have to remind me, was the Apollo like capsule and lander, that was probably like a top secret design, right? So like when you told me that, part of me, or when you're saying this, part of me thinks like he's drawing it for them
Oh,
because I'm not sure if like they were told how it works. I don't know.
that's
I could be wrong,
so
but
funny. I don't know. And it didn't say, oh, that's a great question. It didn't say anything on the, like the little label that accompanied the artifact. But I wonder, yeah, if he's like, okay, don't tell anybody, mom, but here's what I'm gonna do, and
here's how
here's
it
what
works.
I'm
Or like
flying.
when I'm up on
Yeah,
the moon, right? And like you hear
yeah.
something mentioned, this is how this is going to work. But
I'd
yeah,
love to. I'll send you guys a picture. Like it's just all in pencil. It's just so, yeah, just so relatable and so funny in that way. But also, just like what a cool, like unifying experience, the total solar eclipse space. We can all stand in wonder and look up and have a good time.
I feel like that is a great and terrible transition at the same time to my postscript this week, which is always I feel like I'm always doomed to be like the depressing person at the end. Come in, maybe we'll have to like shift mind forward so we can end on more positive notes than this. Um, but in also unifying experiences, nuclear war. I am reading this week a new book out by Annie Jacobson, who is one of my favorite authors. Has written some books about kind of secret elements of the Department of Defense, including Area 51. She also wrote a great book about Operation Paperclip, which is the United States and the Allies' efforts to smuggle German scientists out of Nazi Germany after the Second World War. Her new book is called Nuclear War, a Scenario, and it is horrifying. Have both of you seen Maureen? I'm assuming the answer to this is yes, considering one of your past places of employment. Have you watched the ABC TV movie The Day After from the 1980s?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. I really scared myself at Minuteman Missile. I worked there like in the winter. Nobody was around, so all I did was read books about nuclear war and yeah, developed a pretty healthy paranoia. But yes, I've seen that one.
Yeah, so this is I would equate this book to being a 21st century version of The Day After. This is a minute, well, actually like second by second scenario of what a nuclear conflict would look like in the 2020s. And it is quite sobering and equal parts horrifying. And I would actually say that it is a beneficial read, because I think that there's a lot of conversations going on around the world about conflicts as we kind of enter this destabilized moment in our history in the 2020s with regional conflicts around the world. It's just kind of very sobering to think about and really map out what a scenario like this would look like. And I think Jacobson has done an amazing job of bringing that to life using research and history, to really flesh out what a scenario like that would look like in horrifying the day after like fashion. So a great book. We'll put some links to all of these postscripts that we all three of us had into the show notes, so you can read more about bicycle museums and presidential trees that have been struck by presidential golf balls, and nuclear conflict. And thank you guys so much for listening today. We're going to close it out here. I want to first thank Maureen so much for joining us on our first Making a Public Historian episode.
Thank you so much, fellas. This was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate the work that you're putting into, sharing these conversations with the greater community. So I'm so happy to be part of it. Thank you for asking.
All right. Well, that's all for this episode, everyone. Thanks for listening to our most recent episode of Public History with Jake and Justin. A huge thank you again to Maureen Lavelle for sharing her insights with us. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help us by rating our show and sharing it with others. And if you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and do that now. And we will talk to you all again soon.